with the people who built these houses and the conversations that must have gone on because they all helped each other build these houses. So this goes way back centuries in Rye. But the more formal part of that project, I think you could date it back to 1954 because my mother was involved with a garden club. Jesse Hurley, who founded the society, and she was also involved with the Every Other Tuesday Club. And we have boxes of their stuff.
Yes, we do.
Imagine the Rye treasures that are in there. Because they were a very integral group in Rye. And they formalized the Old House Project. They started it. So they started it, Louise Tallman came along and worked with it. But she didn't get the credit for starting it because it was a group that started it. And then she did wonderful work. Just by chance, I picked up one of our binders that I put together. And guess what's in there? 3 pages of the house you're visiting today. So I will leave that open for you to look at. But then you can see. So Louise did just, a few dozen houses built before 1825. And then I went along in 2009 and tried to take pictures of most of the older houses. But then it was a mess with addresses, and thank God that Lydia comes along a couple of years ago and she saw we needed a volunteer for this project. That's what we did. Because she has that kind of brain that can do this and find the addresses, and you will see her work in here. And we've also got an architectural historian's work in here who's second guessed, some of Louise, because a lot of this is just guesswork. And Lydia will talk about the date in the house. But that kind of brings up the present. So it's the Tuesday Club, Louise, myself, Lydia.
So what I did, I just literally saw the little ad and decided to take. I thought it was taking pictures, but what it turned out to be was Alex had driven around town taking pictures of what he thought looked like an old house, and then the notebook was just pictures and post-it notes with maybe this is this street. I think I saw this on South. So then what I did basically was go around and actually using the database of old houses, right? So we got it from the assessor's office. Like, these are the old houses. I made sure I got pictures of all of them and matched them up with what Alex had, put new pictures in when we needed them, put labels on so they're easy to find. Then started doing research on the houses. Research on these houses, the way I was doing it was using the deed, going back through the deeds. It's hard, it's really fun. You can get pretty far back. It takes a long time to do, like it's a lot of hours for each one, so I didn't get very many done, but the ones I got done, I would kind of supplement what I found in the deeds with internet research on the owners, right? So then you would find out where the poorhouse on Causeway that was taken down was an inn, the Willow Inn. It had a couple different names. It was purchased by a professor or teacher at Phillips Exeter, who got his money from his dad, who was like in the coal business in Denver. I mean, there's all these cool family stories, which is what's interesting to me. To me, what's interesting is who lived in these old houses over time and what happened there. So that to me is a labor of love. I would love to continue it, especially if there's anyone else interested in doing that too. Just, pick a home and just go backwards and then go forwards is how I do it. What else was I supposed to say?
So I'm glad she mentioned the assessor's office, and I thank Janice Island for saying, Alex, we pay taxes in this town. Who do you think sends out the tax bills, and how do they know where to send them? I love the way she talks to me. So she sent me over to Joanne in the assessor's office, and sure enough. But what they have is the current owner and their address, and then AYB, approximate year built. Well, it's anybody's guess who came up with that, because they've got the town hall being built in 1846. And we all know it was 1839. That is documented. So, and there's 70 houses listed as being built in 1900. That's because it looks like a late 18 or early 1900s house. So you kind of get the drift of the assessor's list. It's useful to a certain point, but the best thing about it was those addresses and those names. So then what happened is I guess I'll just slip this in now because that's the Historical Society's role. And now, the Historical Society's role is, so we sort of turned it over to the Rye Advocates, which are 2 representatives from the Historical Society, Historic District Commission, Demo Review Committee, and the Rye Heritage Commission. and then one additional person from one of those groups who's the chair, so we have 9 people. And we realized this kind of needed a separate de facto group. And Lydia and I are the 2 reps from the Historical Society. And so we're obviously continuing to work on it and keeping all those groups informed. So we're not an official town group, so when you see us at the God's Fair, we will join up at the Heritage table. Then we won't need insurance, because we're not a legitimate group, but we're at home.
Well, yeah. I just remember one of the things we wanted to talk about was how we know when a house was built, and we can only conjecture because it's back old enough. And Louise would go by, in her notes it would be, well, they got married in this year, so it must have been somewhere around then that it was built. And then the town maps held the old maps, because if your house is there in the 1851 map, then you know it's prior to then. For my house is actually the parsonage for the Methodist Church that is Town Hall. So I estimated it, it's slightly after the church was built, because I don't know that they housed the parson right away, and I can see when the land was sold, that sort of thing. So it is a lot of like, well, probably it's right around then. And then Alex had a great idea to look in the town reports, and if somebody's taxes went up at a given time, you know that they had a house built there. Sometimes there's a mortgage, there's not that often a mortgage on the older homes, but sometimes there is, and then well, it has to be a house if there's a mortgage, or the later deed will say land and buildings. So it's all, there's no one to tell us, so we conjecture, and that's why it has a little C circa for all those dates.
So you've heard already 2 or 3 things, and then you got the architectural historian who can get much closer, and then those 5 maps, everybody's name is written on it, so that's really cool. And then the marriage thing, and then deeds. You think deeds are just about land, but in fact, you then can find houses because they get houses.
Right, and there's a lot in those deeds. Sometimes you can find personal stories. This person. Well, so we took it away from this person because she lost her mind. Like it literally would say that in like how it went from some person to another. Or you find out like it was given to somebody when they died.
Building materials not be dated? Can you
Probably.
take samples, a specimen of like wood?
So here's the problem. That's another way you can find out. But as you know, the problem is before planning and zoning, which in Rye is 1952. Before that time, if you built a house, it's not recorded by the town. You built the house, and there was no building inspector. So most things went through the select board, and they were almost a law unto themselves. They would drive around and do assessments of the windshield. And they were very open about that, because that's what we had. And finally, once you get the planning and zoning, then it's in their office. That's from 1952. So everything before that, we need to use these other means of educated guesses.
Right. You could do building materials. That's just not an area I.
And that goes back to the architectural historian, and that's what she was noting.
Yeah.
You'll actually see her notes in here. So you'll have some little notes saying, well, this indicates because of the space between the windows and the roof line, all kinds of things. Fascinating. And she's moving away, so we need to find somebody else like that and bring them into this project. We really need that. So if you're listening, and especially if you're not just an architect, but an architectural historian. That's what we need. Okay, so I think it's on to this now, right? Next steps.
Okay.
So next steps, I would just say, wouldn't it be wonderful to get this digitized? We don't have to wait till we're done. When you look at this thing, it's begging to be digitized. So, who's going to do that, or who's going to write the grant to do that, or will somebody come up with the money to pay a UNH intern to do it, or those are the kinds of things you can think about. And then you were going to talk about like the connection of the photos to the existing documents. So.
Right, so I think that has to do with Alex has his history, and we have the photos, and when we digitize, it would be nice to pull those 2 things together, because even when you research on the RHS site, there's a lot of photos there, but it's hard to connect those back to an address, and that would be a really fun project to do. One of the other things is cool is there's the book, the Rye postcard book. I don't know if you've ever used that, but that actually has a lot of good information about the
author is right there.
He was over there.
I moved. I was like, I turned around to see him.
Yeah, I have posters on everything that's important because of the Allen mansion and all of that. So there's a lot out there to pull together. There's nuggets in Parsons' books, that it can just tie that together somehow. And it digitally is the only way to do that. But I do never want to see this, the actual photo albums go away.
Oh no.
Okay. Because there's something special about opening and flipping through, you know, I think tactile, whatever.
And Lou just confirmed, I mean, that's a half-century span of those postcards, right?
Yeah.
First half of the 20th century.
Because everything else then gets into copyright issues, and you got to go through all kinds of a mess. But I've got a question for you when you're done.
Okay, we'll just finish up and then we'll take that. That'd be good. So the last thing, I want to talk about Lydia was just talking about, and then we'll go back to 1901, 1950. Lydia, would you share with them what you were just sharing with us, like stories from more recent houses, like since 1950?
Yeah, what I was thinking about is when, so I'll talk about one thing Right Advocates is going to try to do is a Preservation and Restoration Award. And when we think about the Preservation and Restoration Award, we're looking to recognize a home or farmhouse or barn or whatever that is a great example of somebody who's kept it up over time and or, you know, like made it newly beautiful. And when we talked about it, we're like, well, we have to take a house from prior to 1901, but the building that made me think of the award was actually the the new motel, where the guy bought that motel and restored it. He did not tear it down. So I was like, dang it, like that doesn't fit because it's 1963. I looked it up. Not even close.
Oh, really? That's what
Yeah.
Cool.
So, and also visiting a friend who lives in a 1950 house, Karen. We know a lot about these houses, like these houses that are 1950. They don't feel so old now, but the people who live there, they might be second generation. It was built by their parents, so we really know the story. So if we can capture that story instead of waiting until 2050 to start talking to them, I think that would be an important part of our history, and I would love to do that because it seems easy compared to some of the other research projects.
So the last thing is, you know, there's roughly, 300 plus, roughly built, up to beginning of the 20th century, and then roughly 1900 to 1950, 736. Don't quote us on that. And then since then, according to the assessor's office, 1951 to the present, 1,900 and I'll say 80 because there's probably been 7 houses built since she gave me that information. And so that's about 3,000 plus houses in this town, which I know has made a lot of people groan when they hear that, but that's the reality. And we do want to look at that next section because we just thought the first half of the 20th century, that group would be the next group because the RHS Advocates sent out letters and surveys to the first group of pre-1900. And now, at some point, with this much larger group, we want to try to approach them, but we're not quite sure how yet. So.
Right, so that's the next part of the project is to move into the 20th century and, before the house gets demolished.
Yeah.
Get there, find out about it, get the history written down, get the picture taken, add it to our Rye Town history. That's what we do. Question?
Had a question?
Oh, Lou, I'm sorry.
How many houses have you got in that inventory?
So this one here includes Louise's black and white 1970s photos, plus the 2009 inventory I did. And my idea of my drive through the windshield, through the door photographs, I was looking at houses. I wasn't trying to go to mid-20th century, so it was very rough. So that is approximately, if you look at all of the ones in the 4 binders, would add up to something like, maybe, I don't know, it's 4 binders. I can't even guess what you've looked at. But
Well,
that's
yeah.
a tough question to answer
Well,
because it's not complete.
Here's why I'm asking. If we looked at the most significant, the oldest and most significant houses, are there 100?
No, Louise did pre-1825, and she missed some, but that was just like 40.
Okay. So we could then bump it into the mid-19th century, which would bump it up to. But what I'm thinking is, the work that you put in it is mind-boggling and significant. There's an opportunity not only for the digitization, which is wonderful because then you can have access all around the country for it. But wouldn't it be nice to take that information and put it in the form of a publication through Arcadia, which wouldn't cost us anything. It's just the research and the photographic stuff, which is done. Because I got to tell you, and I'm glad you brought up the postcard book, only because that book, I've gotten so many comments of, you know what, I can show people where I live. I'm so proud my house is in this book, kind of thing. So to get this in that format is invaluable to people who live in these historic homes, because they can point to it and say, yes, my house is significant, but look, it's been documented as such. And for us, it's a good educational tool too. So if we could get 100 to 120 of those profiles and put the stories around them that you're talking about, that would be a huge, huge contribution to the community with very little cost to us, but significant value to Rye.
Right.
Because why do all of that and have it sit in binders and on the web when people like the physical thing that they can actually have on their coffee? You know, it's all pride, right? I live in this great historic house. Look, they've even documented it for me.
I'd make that the priority over what that woman Erin wants you and I to do, which is
Well, no, that's
20th century.
Honestly, Alex, that's what I was thinking. I was
You're right.
thinking that this
This is better.
is better.
This is better.
And we don't have any copyright issues. We don't have anything to deal with like that, because it's all original research that the two of you have done,
Yeah.
or using public documents. So you don't need to go after somebody and get permission to use this photograph or this document, because it's deeds and all those things and your photographs. Or if we can find the houses in our collection or in the stereo views
Right.
or on postcards, we're good.
So to me, that's what is nice, is to supplement it, obviously, with the photographs that are already in the Historical Society,
Right.
but also what we can find in news clippings or, you know, somewhere else that blossoms out the story a little bit more.
Yeah.
But it is, frankly, it was hard. You know, I went alphabetically and numerically along the streets. So did we hit significant houses when we actually dug in and did some research? I don't know. So it'd be great to identify, especially way before David Choate comes and says, this is going to be demolished, find some information on it, you know, like, I want to find it. And that's what I've been thinking about, if we knew which way to go, and not to repeat the research, because some of the houses, like your house is, you know, obviously well documented, but there's some houses that are out there that we find, there's a beautiful house on the end of Highland Park, which you would never know, because that's a newer, do you know where that is? Oh my gosh, the most gorgeous, like, New Englander, which I know is not actually a style, down there, and I just want to know more and more about that, or the house on Concord Point, you know,
We
so.
want to lobby for that to be a style. I know it's not the most
I know.
beautiful style, but Nina has one in Portsmouth that are all over Rye. I love them. And especially the way people have added on quite tastefully to them.
Yeah.
Like Stacy Smith, you know,
Yeah,
the yellow house
yeah.
across from the
Yeah.
cemetery. Thank you, Lou, for all of that. So this is a funny story about Fred Clark. So we were on the trolley tour, and there was Fred Clark doing something right on the bridge on Red Mill Lane, where used to stand the last building from the 1600s in Rye. And Fred's relative, we won't say any more about who he is or what Fred thinks of him, tore it down in the 1950s. It was in beautiful shape. It's this historic mill, this great post and beam edifice, and been turned into an art studio and various other things. It was red, that's why it became Red Mill Lane. So he tore that down. I didn't think there were any more buildings from the 1600s until I visited the house at the intersection of Wallace and Brackett Road. So it's the only old house that's literally on that intersection, and the back of it faces Wallace. The front door faces Brackett, so that's its address. And you walk around in there, wow. You believe maybe it is 1694. I don't know quite where they got that date from, but who knows? So maybe we have one, and that's a gem. And I didn't mention house tours, but house tours, except for the 1954 one that my mother, well, we've had half dozen of them in the second half of the 20th century up to 2002, and we are so overdue for another one. But it's incredibly labor intensive. I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you both so much. Does anyone else have questions or any ideas?
How are you indexing them? By street address? Or?
So when I put these binders together, the only way I could think to do it was alphabetized by road. So this first one you'll look at here is
bracket to central.
Bracket to Central. It goes
But in
right
Central,
up.
because Central has so many houses on
That runs
it.
into volume
And then
two.
they're in numerical order after that, which they weren't previously. But now they are. And then in the binders, you'll find that there's some houses that aren't in the area. Oh, look at that's the house. Yeah.
That's right. That's how we're going to open right up there.
So we tried to supplement with new pictures from this
Yep.
year or last year.
Yeah, so she's added some. I put a bunch in, and Louise's are in there. You'll see Louise's are
Yeah.
black and whites.
It's super nice when it's like, because sometimes there's a super historic picture, Louise's picture, Alex's, and mine. Yours sometimes are just perfect.
And Janet's got
You need
this
an
other
additional
one, which I gave to her, and I just sent her a digital one. It's a horse and buggy. It shows when this was a store. It's got to be over, well over 100 years old.
Yeah,
And it's got the old house next door.
Yeah.
It's great.
some cool pictures.
Yeah, let's put this right out here for people to enjoy.
Thank you. There's also a notebook on the kitchen table about this house, and then there's a notebook about the 5 Grove Road, which